Nog maar 4 dagen scheiden ons van de bekerfinale tegen Mechelen. En wij van de Vierkante Paal doen deze week een extra effort om elke dag een podcast te brengen. Normaal gezien hebben we enkel fans of mensen met een Antwerp-hart te gast. Maar vandaag hebben we 2 analisten over de vloer, 2 mannen van over het water. En nee, niet van Kruijbeke of Bornem. Ben Jackson is British, Scott Coyne is een Scotsman. Zij zijn host van Belgian Football Podcast en dus zal deze podcast in het Engels zijn. Bij mij is ook nog altijd our own Bob Dejongh. So welcome to the Square Post episode 258. Scott, Ben, thank you very much for making it and joining us tonight. For the people who don't know Belgian Football Podcast and yourselves, feel free to briefly introduce yourselves and what you do with your podcast.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, guys, for having us. It's great to be on. We started the Belgian Football Podcast in, I think it was 2020, wasn't it, Scott? The depths of the pandemic, because there wasn't an English-speaking Belgian football podcast. And yeah, we cover every single team from the top, even some teams from the second division now. We just speak about everything and everything wonderful about Belgian football, everything not so wonderful about Belgian football, weekly rants about VAR and everything like that. I'm strictly neutral. Scott does have slight leanings towards one side that will probably come out during this podcast potentially.
All right.
What makes a Scotsman and a Brit so interested in Belgian football? Of all competitions you can choose from, you get the Premier League right there.
You have no idea how many times we get asked this question by people, and there's actually quite a good story behind this. Obviously, people won't know this, but Ben used to write tactical analysis pieces for total football analysis, tactical football analysis on the Pro League specifically. And I think, Ben's thinking when he started the BFP was to use the pod as a way of kind of thinking through his articles. And talking about his own love of the Pro League. And I've always liked Belgian football, always had an interest in it, partly because I have a love of Belgium as a country and Belgian culture. And I've been lucky enough to do a fair bit of travelling in the country as well. So I've seen a good chunk of it and kind of love it. So my love of Belgium and my love of football were bound to come together at some point. And very luckily, just by chance, I came across Ben's first couple of episodes, which was basically just Ben talking to himself on his bedroom floor, I think, about what was happening that weekend. And I got in touch and left him a little message and said, "Look, this is great. I'd listen to this. This is brilliant." And very quickly, Ben got in touch with me and said, "Look, do you want to kind of come on board?" And I thought, does he want me to come on as a guest and talk about my love of Belgian football? But actually, he's like, "No, let's build this and see what happens." And Arioris kind of came along at the same time, and things have kind of exploded for us, haven't they, Ben? Nobody is covering Belgian football to the extent that we are anyway in English, and very, very quickly we've become the go-to place for coverage of Belgian football in English, so much so that we now field inquiries, different kinds of media inquiries as well.
All right.
And we've been on the radio in the UK talking about the Red Devils and, other Belgian club teams at various points, Union Saint-Gilloise, European adventures and things like that. So there's a massive appetite for what we do, and we're just having a great time, sharing our love of Belgian football with the rest of the world.
And I gotta say, you two, I'm a frequent listener of the podcast, and I gotta say, you two know way much more about Belgian football than I do. Of every team, every player, how they play, what tactics that they use. It's quite impressive. I gotta say, I know a lot about Antwerp, and I know some of Bruges and Anderlecht and Union Genk, but I don't care about Ostend. I don't care about. But you really know these teams. You really know them. You figured them out, and you gotta say that's quite impressive. So that's why I really wanted you to be on board for this episode and to preview next Sunday's game.
A small side note as well is that it's kind of a running gag that Bob introduced himself into the podcast. He doesn't know anything about football in general.
True story.
Uh, he's minimalizing it, but he knows a bit. But he's always like, I have no clue about football. So, guys, in first place as well, I'm quite curious because you have a profound love for football. But can you show your own colors in terms of your home team? Quite curious.
Do you want to go
Yeah, I
first then,
guess.
yeah?
Yeah, my home team's a little bit more niche, maybe than Scott's. My team's Reading, Reading FC in the beautiful county of Berkshire.
Hmm.
We're looking like we're going to be relegated this season, so it's not been such a great year for us. But maybe people remember we spent like 2 years in the Premier League. Maybe I think it was 3. Um, Also used to live in Germany, so I used to be a season ticket holder with Fortuna Düsseldorf, so two very
Okay.
kind of similar teams in sense of second division kind of solidarity. Not many Belgian players have played for Reading, but for
No.
Düsseldorf, I think Benito Raman was the most recent kind of one. They used to do a lot of shopping in Belgium. Raman, obviously, yeah, a little bit of a character, but
Yeah. That's nicely put. Being put him away as a kind of a character. And you, Scott?
Well,
Oh,
I actually live not that far outside Glasgow, about half an hour outside Glasgow, and my own team back here in Scotland is Celtic, and a bit like Ben, for a number of years I had a season ticket at Celtic Park, and during the time that the BFP was kind of launched, which coincided, as Ben was saying, with the first coronavirus lockdown, I had to decide what I was going to do about my season ticket. And I decided to roll the dice and thought, you know what, I'm going to get stuck into this Belgian football podcast malarkey with the guys and see where this takes us. And it's just, as I was saying, kind of taken off. So I don't get to see my own team that much. In fact, my own side are actually playing this Sunday in a game at exactly the same time as the cup final. And I will absolutely, without any question of a doubt, be watching Antwerp against Mechelen. There's no doubt about it.
speaking with real, like a real heart, and then as a real professional, you're going to choose your love of Belgian football above the love of your home team. That's beautiful. Where, in fact, you're gonna watch the game? Any specific plans?
Well, we did talk a while ago about actually trying to get to the game. We've been quite lucky since we started the BFP in developing a lot of really good connections inside clubs, both in the Pro
Hmm.
League and in the Challenger Pro League. And we looked at the possibility of kind of coming to the cup final. It didn't quite work out for us this year. So I don't know about Ben, but I'll be watching at home. It's actually available to watch free. Yes, free and live in the UK
All right.
on a platform called Mola TV, which actually shows 3 free and live Belgian games each weekend in the UK. And that's how we see a lot of our games. But obviously, you can watch them on a pay-per-view basis on the 11 Sports website, and sometimes we
Yeah.
access them that way as well. But Belgian football is becoming much more accessible to watch without spending any money in the UK, isn't it, Ben? Which is great.
it's a rarity, yeah.
So Ben,
Where are
whereabouts for you?
Yeah, I'll probably be sat in my living room, just where I am right now on the sofa watching it. I've got a good beer shop round the corner, which does import some of the Belgian stuff. So I'll go
Good
pick some of
stuff.
that up. Yeah, sit there, maybe get some fries on the go, and like feel proper Belgium. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. But do you say fries in England? I always thought it was chips.
Chips, yeah, chips. But people always get confused when we talk about chips. Like, what do you mean? Why are you having chips? It's not the same.
All right, yeah. So crisps and chips. We're not going to talk about that, obviously. We are here, in fact, to talk about the cup final. You guys already explained your follow Belgian football, even the Challenger Pro League, uh, which is similar to the championship for you. Or it's the first league beneath the top flight. Even the cup, you have followed the path of Mechelen and also from Antwerp. So if you compare both campaigns, how do you compare it, and what were your first thoughts of the two finalists we have on Sunday?
Yeah, I guess, obviously being on your guys' podcast, maybe sounding a bit biased, but obviously your semi-final was the difficult semi-final, wasn't it? The Union game. Like, I think Scott probably agree, we always felt like whoever was going to win that was probably going to win the final. It felt like that was the possibility that was kind of the final before the final, in a sense. And I think if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, I was like, I think I would probably put you guys down for another kind of 5-0, because Mechelen had just they'd checked out of the season. They were done. They'd finished. They were kind of just coasting towards the cup final. But the last two games, I've been surprised that they've actually decided to start playing. It's like they've suddenly switched it on. And they've got kind of some of their players back fit as well, which I think is massive for them, because that's just the way that squad is. They're so dependent on Rob Scoofs and Jeffrey Heremans. They're kind of the two. Obviously, you guys know a lot about Heremans from the past, and he's having his best ever season this year, which is just absolutely ridiculous at the age that he is. He's kind of rolling it back again. So I'm looking forward to it a lot more than I was, because I thought Mechelen were just going to get cooked. But even I didn't even fancy them against Zulte Waregem, to be honest. I thought Zulte would probably win that one. So I was quite surprised that they did actually make it through with the team that they kind of have put out, and with Stephen Defoe. I know Scott obviously has a slight more leaning towards Mechelen, so he's probably watched them a little bit more closely than I have. But yeah, I think you guys had the more difficult path for sure. And I think Mechelen is kind of a symptom of their season. They've got there, and you just don't really know what's going to happen with them. You just don't know what Mechelen's going to turn up. It could be a terrible, terrible Mechelen performance, or they could actually rise to the occasion.
I think Antwerp have definitely kind of done this the hard way. You know what I mean? They've absolutely earned the right to be in the final this year. You know, they had a very difficult game against Beveren as well, in which, of course, former favourite Diomersi Mbakani stepped up with a couple of goals, which helped that go all the way to penalties, and that was quite a tie. And then obviously playing Standard and Genk as well. No easy games, which you made look very easy, actually. Breeze past both of them in the end. And then there was that, as Ben was saying, that really hardly fought semi-final, which went to penalties as well. So you've absolutely earned your right to be there. And you're on amazing form at the moment, you know, and I've been having an amazingly kind of consistent season. Ben alluded to my slight soft spot, you know, in terms of Belgian sides. If I have a soft spot for anybody, I do have a soft spot for Mechelen for a whole host of reasons, which I will share with you, since we're talking about, you know, Mechelen and in the final.
All right.
My partner actually has some Belgian ancestry, believe it or not, which goes back to Mechelen. And it's one of the reasons why I've spent a fair bit of time in Mechelen. I was actually over there recently for a few days. You know, some family history that can get traced back to Mechelen as a city. So I've got to know Mechelen kind of quite well, as I have Antwerp, with them not being very far apart at all, of course. So I do have a slight soft spot for Malinois for a number of reasons. I've met some Mechelen fans as well, whose kind of company I kind of quite enjoyed. But as we were saying before I recorded, I've been to the Bossel, but I've yet to get to a game at the Actor de Kazerne, because the calendar manager has so far thwarted me. But I think, you know, Ben was talking about, you know, Mechelen have had a really poor season. Actually, none of the signings that came in this time last year and over the summer have had any kind of positive impact at all. They've had no consistency going at any point. They've been very unlucky with injuries, and it's just been a bit of a nightmare season for them. It was always going to be difficult after Wouter Rankin left, I think. I think they knew that, but I don't think they necessarily expected it to be quite as poor a season as it has been. And actually, they've only really escaped getting dragged right into a relegation battle by the skin of their teeth, to be honest. So they have a big summer ahead of them. I think the worry from Antwerp's point of view is obviously this is a free hit for Mechelen. The season's been so poor. the message for them on Sunday will be, look, go out there, play your game, express yourselves and enjoy it, because you can wipe away what's been a very poor season by winning this. And obviously that's the thing that Antwerp have to watch out for, because I think everybody's assuming, because they are rightly hot favourites, that this is going to be quite easy for them. But we know what finals are like. Often the winner is the side that copes best with the nerves on the day. And we saw in recent years, Anderlecht have choked, as we say here, on the big stage against Ghent as well. So it's really going to come down to, I think, who can express themselves better and who holds their nerves, because it's that old cliche. It's a one-off game, isn't it?
Yeah, true that. With all that said, Bob, he prepared 5 bold statements on which we would like to see your opinion or your thoughts about. First bold statement.
Well, we already kind of answered it, but first statement, Antwerp is the clear and obvious favorite for Sunday's game.
Yeah, I think kind of like I said, I think a couple of weeks ago, 100%, I'd have been like 99% Antwerp, 1% Mechelen. Now I'm probably like 80% Antwerp, 20% Mechelen. I'm giving them a little bit of a chance, just because like you just don't know. Like Rob Scoos could score like a stupid goal from 30 yards, or he gets like a deflected goal from 30 yards. Like he just has that in his locker where he can just pick the ball out of nowhere. They get a set piece. Jeffrey's got a good set piece delivery on him. David Bates heads it in like he did against Anderlecht or something like that. Like just something stupid could happen. But I'm kind of, I'd agree. I think Antwerp are hot favourites. Just no injuries in terms of like key players and stuff like that as well. Like that should be a massive worry.
Yeah, they've been defensively very, very strong as well this season, right since the beginning. And like in all games, another cliche again here, folks, but, I think the first goal is going to be very important. I think if Antwerp score first, it's going to be very difficult for Mechelen, because they'll then have to come out more and open up, and that's going to leave more space, obviously, for Antwerp to exploit. So first goal is going to be really important.
That was actually my third statement. If Antwerp scores first, they win. Is that?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Barring something extraordinary, and Ben's listed what those things might actually be. Those amazing things. Honestly, everybody, we didn't know the questions in advance. We have no crystal ball. I think the first goal, if Antwerp score first, I think they will go on to win.
Yeah, and I think so. I think just on that one.
Go ahead.
I think if Antwerp score first, I think what you have to that will kind of win you the game is the midfield. I think Mandela, Keita, and Vermeer, and if those two are starting in there, that is such a good strong midfield in terms of like just kind of keeping teams out and stuff like that. I just don't see. Again, I've mentioned Scoops. He's probably the only one you're kind of worried about in that midfield for Mechelen that's going to do anything, because I believe for starters can't play anyway, so they're not going to have him in there. Like I don't even know who else they're going to stick in there. Rabti, like he's not really kind of good in central areas, in the central midfield area sort of places. I don't think he's going to be as effective. So I think that those two, and then obviously Alderweireld at the back. You just think with his kind of intelligence, who have Mechelen got up front that's going to should really worry him at the moment. Like Ngoy's inconsistent. Malady's probably not going to start up front. De Cruz, like he can do some things, but I don't see him as an out and out striker. So I think it's like we kind of said, excuse or Herringmans has to pick something out of the bag if they go 1-0 down.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about the midfield, earlier this week we were talking on our podcast, and I don't recall who said it, but someone said that our midfield, Antwerp midfield, Keita, Vermeer, stinks. Ekkelenkamp is the best in the league. Would you agree?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question.
Well, Genk is also pretty. With Heine, with Rozovsky, Thomas at Union.
Union's I really like their. I love like the Tuma, Lazar, and I think like Lenin probably gets a little bit passed over because those two are so dominant. I really like their three. There's some good midfields in that kind of top four sort of area. On paper, you'd think Club Brugge should have a good midfield three, but it doesn't really seem to be working out how they want it to. But yeah, I wouldn't be bold enough to say that is the best midfield in the league, but it's definitely up there.
And to further jump on that, so you guys are fully aware that Mandela Keita, we've got him on loan from Leuven, from OHL. Can you understand why a guy like Mandela Keita didn't play in the first place on the OHL side, and then
No, I never understood it. I absolutely don't understand what. But then Beers he left, and Beers was like, "Oh, I'm so annoyed he's left." It's like, well, why didn't you play him then? Like, what were you doing? He'd much rather play Casper De Noor, who was like a left midfielder in central midfield. He'd rather play Steve Slivers, who was a striker in central midfield. Like,
yeah,
he just put all these other players. He'd rather play Malinov than Keita. It just makes no sense.
he plays Joran Dom up central midfield.
Yeah, you're in Dom. Like,
While
crazy.
we all know that Joran Dom used to be a very lousy goalkeeper for Royal Antwerp, so uh, to top this story, this is a story I've picked up a long time ago. Mark Brijs, the coach from the Leuven side, he used to coach our rivals, Beerschot. And he used to say to Moussa Dembele back in the day when he was very young, "You can go. It's all right." So see how that turned out. It seems like
Yeah.
history could be repeating itself.
I think
Maybe another
sometimes
unplanned bold statement.
I was going to say, Ziggy, I think sometimes coaches don't necessarily get their calls on players right. I mean,
Maybe.
Ben's right. We talked about this at the time. You know, we were surprised that Mark Bryce said, "Oh, I'm frustrated that he's gone out on loan because I kind of wanted to keep him." Well, he certainly didn't show that. Do you know what I mean? Because he wasn't, as Ben was saying, kind of getting the game time. And then we know inside clubs as well that, you know, technical directors or sporting directors have a huge amount of sway now as well. So sometimes in some clubs, you don't always know who's actually making decisions like that as well. So it's difficult to kind of pinpoint why that might be. But it's certainly been to kind of, Antwerp's gain, that's for sure.
Okay. Second statement we also have get an answer for, but let me just throw it in. Michel has gained new confidence after the draw against Ghent and the win in Anderlecht.
Yeah,
Like you said, Ben, like 3 weeks ago.
they were gone. Yeah, they were just coasting through. And I don't know if they planned to kind of do that, if they were like, we'll just try and ramp it up again 2 weeks out. Because it's not like players have come back in and it's suddenly like, oh, we've got these players back, we're starting to play again. I think they definitely have. I think, but then again, kind of like seeing kind of the fan reaction. I didn't watch the game against Anderlecht, but it sounded like they could have been out of it before half time. They get those 2 goals, and then it's like, oh, okay, suddenly we'll start playing again. But I watched their game against Leuven, obviously, when they just got absolutely hammered, and I was just like, what is this? Like, the defending was terrible. Kook, like, I think I said it on our podcast, he started with like a reasonable amount of hair, and by the end of the game he'd lost like a lot of hair. Like, he had this massive bald patch just like growing on the back of his head. And he's another one that you kind of think he needs to have a big game as well if they're going to do anything in this, because he hasn't had the season he had last year where people were like, this guy is good enough to go. Like, I just don't think anyone's talking about him leaving at the moment, which is interesting because last year it was like he was even saying, I'm ready to leave. And now it's like, well, you're not as good as you were last season. But yeah, I think you're right, Bob. I think they've definitely taken confidence from that, which is good as a neutral for the cup final, because like we've been saying before that, it was just kind of, it didn't feel like a cup final that was coming up.
Yeah, I think they needed to get back on it again. I think because there were some really worrying signs, as Ben was saying, that they'd gone, and I think it was typical of their season. Actually, has been to have gone on some pretty dismal runs, and then it looks like they're starting to turn a corner, and then it happens that they're not again. But interestingly, they haven't scored against Antwerp this season, so. I suppose, hopefully, from their point of view, this will be something that Stephen Defoe's reminding them that they've kind of got a point to prove in a way, and that's the danger for Antwerp as well. I think that a side that they've beaten pretty convincingly in 2 previous occasions this season, and haven't scored against them. Want to be able to go out there and show that they've still got something. It's going to be interesting the first 20 minutes this game, I think, to see how Mechelen start this, because I would expect them to try and start quite hard and fast, as traditionally they like to do. They've not been doing that much of that this season, but I think if things are going to go well for them, I think they're going to have to start the game well in that sense, and not allow Antwerp, I think, to make their mark in the game physically. Antwerp have been very good at controlling games that way. And I think if they don't do that, then there's a chance that Antwerp will really be able to kind of set the tempo and dictate the way that this game pans out, really.
So you don't expect Sunday's game to be closed and to be really tactical, and you expect two teams to go right ahead and try to attack us as much as possible.
I think so. I think the first quarter of an hour might be quite tight as both sides feel each other out. But this is the hallmark of, and I said this last year actually, I was spectacularly wrong about the cup final. I felt potentially there was quite a lot of goals in last year's one, and there wasn't. But we've got two sides this year who play good attacking football, and are open in their play a lot of the time. So it could potentially, and that's just my caveat because of what I said about last year's game, that I feel that there's goals in this. But both sides have to go out and relax, I think. If this goes all the way to penalties and is quite a tight game, it'll be because neither side, wants to express themselves. Really, really interesting psychology, though. Like I was saying, the one side who really have been cruising very strongly all season, very consistent, and have every reason to be very confident going into this. The other side know they've got nothing to lose and have had a very poor season, so they'll just be hoping that they can kind of turn up and give their best in the day. But it's set up to be really interesting, I think.
You want to take another statement, Ziggy?
Yeah, sure. If Mechelen scores more than once, Antwerp is in trouble.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it really do. Yeah, I guess it kind of depends when they score. I think if they score 2 within the first 10 minutes, I think you'll be okay, because I think that's far too long for Mechelen to keep any team out. Like, they're just not going to do that. It's just not going to happen. I think it's just
interesting insight.
I think for Antwerp, it just really depends on like how well kind of those front players are clicking on the day. Like, if Staines can get kind of a lot of space in those good areas, then I think it'll be fine. If I feel like someone like who I don't know if you guys have listened to us, but Scott's heard me, like when Muya first started, I was like, this guy's terrible. Like, why is this guy playing? Whereas now, like, he's one of those players that, like, yeah, he's going to be kind of, I think in a cup final, he's one of those players that will just love it, because he kind of loves kind of the passion and everything that goes along with that, like kind of driving the game forward. Yeah. So I think it's kind of those sort of players that are going to be key. If you do, like, let's say Mechelen go into like a 2-0 race into that 2-0 lead, it's going to kind of be down to those sort of guys to really break down a Mechelen side that's just going to sit quite deep. Which would, it kind of would then take out the kind of the Alderweireld long ball over the top, which is really effective, obviously, because he's ridiculously good at it. But then it's going to be kind of pushing everyone forward. And I think it'd be good for someone like Vermeeren as well, because we'll get to see him further forward, which a lot of people have been asking us. They're like, is he playing a little bit further forward? Are we starting to see that more kind of creative side of him? So I think for Mechelen, it will kind of going into a 2-0 lead might actually, or getting more than the ball kind of they go up, the more they're going to sit back and defend. It's going to be quite worrying. So if they're going to score more than once, it needs to be like in the 90th minute, in my opinion.
How I'm gonna say this without sounding too full of ourselves as Antwerp, but do you really think Michel is gonna score 2 times against the side with the most clean sheets?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was just about to say the thing about Antwerp this season is defensively they've been very good. So I would be quite surprised if Mechelen scored twice. especially considering they haven't scored once against Antwerp this season. So, but cup finals are altogether an entirely different game as well, and the psychology around it is an entirely different thing. As I was saying earlier, it's really about nerves more than anything else, I think. So stranger things have happened, but it's not likely. Mechelen are normally a pretty good side offensively. They've not been anywhere near as offensively strong as they have been in recent years this season. Um, Antwerp being strong defensively and Mechelen not being as good offensively as they have been in recent years, I think makes it much less likely that Mechelen are going to score two, which contradicts everything I said earlier about seeing goals in this game, because I'm now convincing myself that it's actually there's not going to be very much in it.
Nevertheless, actually, their attack didn't change that much because they still have Rob Scholes, they still have Storm, they still have Hermans. So it's quite odd to see that the motor wasn't like going and did that they find the way to the back of the net. I think Hermans is the top scorer this season, so it's also a bit against all odds. I think he was very important for us back in the day, but never that decisive as he was now. He really grew into that Mechelen side, and unfortunate for him that it didn't turn out as it should have probably for Mechelen. So I'm still staying cautious. Being said that, do we expect seeing Mechelen score 2 goals? But
yeah, we have Alderweireld, we have Pacho, we have Buté. I'm
and
quite confident that Mechelen won't score more than once.
And also, Ben, as you said, pointed out really nicely, I wanted to pick this up because in our panel of the podcast, we do have some people who are like a bit skeptic on seeing Vermeer playing a bit up more front. In my opinion, I think it was really necessary because with Keita and Vermeer, you had a bit of like similar profiles, which were a bit more defending. So yeah, I've reckon it helped us to bring a little bit more fresh football in midfield,
more energy.
Nevertheless, Vermeer showed his use on the defensive side as well of the game. So I'm very curious how it will all turn out in the final. If also our manager Van Bommel will take some changes or not in his tactics, if he will stroll on how we've played all season long, or if he's gonna change something crucially in the tactics to surprise Michelen's side. I don't know. Do you have any feeling about that because you followed like both Steven de Voer and Van Bommel all season long? Do you reckon they have some bonus cards or a joker in their hand to play with?
I think for Van Bommel, I just don't think he's going to change. I just don't see the need. Like, I think you know what you're going to get out of these players. He can also kind of like plug players into those different positions, and it's not really going to change too much. I think for Mechelen, like you mentioned, the three Storm, Herem, and Scoofs, that they're the three that they'll probably play their positions. But it's the striker where he kind of like mixes it up a little bit because basically he doesn't have one that he really trusts. Like we know that we thought Ngoy was going to be that one. We thought he's kind of the profile of striker that they should like in Mechelen. He should be able to do the physical stuff and that. But he's just been injured and can't do it. Milady's like, I know Scott was quite high on him when he joined. Joris was the complete opposite. So they were kind of like clashing. But again, he's not really done in it. And then De Cruz sometimes plays up front, which that might be what he goes with because De Cruz can just kind of come off of Alderweireld and Pacho and then maybe try and confuse them a little bit. But I don't think it will because I just don't think, even if he does come off, like they're not going to really try and get him behind too much. So I think they are kind of relying on those other three to kind of hit from distance, basically, because that's what they do. He sometimes plays in Rabti up front as well, which is a similar kind of way of playing to De Cruz. But I just think physically against Alderweireld and Pacho, like you can't really do that. I think you've got to try and put someone a little bit more physical on those two guys. because it just doesn't really work. Like we were at the East End game. We came to watch that, and I think they were playing like Ambrose up front, and it was just like, this is not working. Like, it's never going to work against these two, because obviously Pacho's physical, but he's also quite quick. So it's like he can match you for pace. He's going to be fine at that.
Yeah.
So I hope he plays in Goy, because I think that's his best option. But I just don't think that's not where they're gonna win the game. And I don't think I don't know what Defoe can do otherwise. I don't think he'll change. He's played with a back four. He's not going to play with a back three. I think he's basically lines up the same way that Anderlecht do, and I think that's just what he's going to do. And just, I don't know, Scott, you've obviously, you're not too sure on Defoe, and I don't think we've seen enough from Defoe to suggest he's a tactical genius or he's going to have anything up his sleeve. He just doesn't really seem like that sort of manager.
I think, I was talking earlier about them having a very difficult season for a number of reasons. And I think next season is going to be a very big one for Stephen Defoe, actually, because, as Ben was saying there, I personally, this is just my own view, I'm not convinced he's T1 material. And that's aside from the fact that they've had a poor season. I think I've just seen enough this season to suggest that, it's not for him in my view. I think he's a good coach, but I'm not convinced he's a T1. I think there are a lot more question marks over Mechelen's starting 11 than there are Antwerp's. I think most people could probably get Antwerp's starting 11 down. Without getting too many wrong. Mechelen's might throw a few small surprises. Tactically in certain positions, but Mechelen are going to be very reliant on 3, potentially 4 players, all playing at the top of their game if they're going to win this as well, and that's not something they've done too many times this season. So that's going to be really important for them. Ziggy mentioned Arthur Ramiren actually earlier. Just in him, that point about him playing further forward, I think, is actually quite an interesting one, because obviously there's a lot of clubs looking at him at the moment. Antwerp tied him down in a new contract not too long ago to protect their investment, wisely so. Should anyone come calling, it'll have to be a significant fee. I think the point about him playing further forward, I think, is twofold. I think Mark Van Bommel's done that recently to encourage his game to develop more, and I think they know that should a club from a top 5 league want to come in for him at some point, then they're going to be looking, I think, at him in a more offensive sense than anything else, because that's going to raise his profile and his potential fee even further as well. So I think that's got a lot to do with why he's being encouraged to push a little bit further forward, because as Ziggy was saying, his profile is very, very similar to Keita's as well. And, giving one of them the initiative and the license to go, look, get forward a little bit more, break lines, take some shots, I think is important. And at his age, I think that's the one thing he needs to be encouraged to do, because obviously he's a little bit younger than Keita, not by much, but.
Talking about the 11 names on the Antwerp squad, I think it's pretty obvious. You got Buté, Alderweireld, Pacho, Vermeer, probably Keita, Stinks, but it's the backs and the wingers. That is, who would you put if you were Van Bommel in Mark Van Bommel?
Oh yeah, I think I'd probably go Richie for a cup final. I think he's the sort of player. It's just the more leaders you can pack into a team, I think the better. I think you stick Richie out there. On the other side, probably Yeli, maybe Yeli Bataille. I don't know over him or Vines. I'm not. Avia just kind of concerns me massively in a cup final. Like, he will get in a fight with someone and he'll get sent off.
Yeah.
If the starter was playing, he'd get in a fight with him, 100%. He'll probably get in a fight with Stephen Defoe. Like, he's getting in a fight. Like, I can't remember what game was it against Anderlecht. Or I can't remember who is against Genk. He was just getting in fights with Preciado the whole game. He just loves a scrap. So definitely not him. He's not getting on. He's not getting on the pitch for me.
Yeah.
The wings, probably, yeah. I think Muir's earned the right to start. I think he's been pretty good over the last couple of games. I guess then the last one, are you thinking Balakwisha or Kirk? Is that kind of like... See, I like I still believe in Balakrishnan. I still believe he has like that ability in him to do some stuff. Like with Kirk, I guess with Kirk, you know exactly what you're going to get on the day. Like he's going to work hard. He's going to do what you want him in terms of working hard. But Balakrishnan's got the X factor of he could score a really, really good goal at some point out of nowhere. He may not do everything else that you want him to do, but I think looking at kind of if we're matching up against the Mechelen fullbacks, whoever's playing on the right is probably going to have quite a good game because at left back they're struggling. They just don't know who to put in there. Then you've got Sandy Walsh on the other side, who I think since he's come back in, maybe you could argue they've been a little bit better. I've always thought Sandy Walsh is he's a solid defender.
Yeah, true.
So I'd probably put Muir on him just to tire him out, and then stick Balakrishnan or Kirk on the right, and just kind of have a go at whoever's on there at left back for Mechelen. I don't think it really matters who you play on the right hand side. But yeah, that's kind of just.
I'm free on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly that.
We'll put a corner flag on the right side.
Yeah, I think that just about do it.
Would you agree, Scott?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's not a lot I would disagree with there. I think Avia might start. I agree with what Ben said about him. I think I think there's the potential for some discipline issues, and I just think with that grit that he's got, I think that might make him quite a good choice to start a cup final. Depends how Mark's feeling on the day. But yeah, I mean, Balak-Wisha, I think Balak-Wisha could have quite a big part to play in this game. He's already scored, I think, six this season as well, hasn't he? So he's having not a bad season. And I've liked what I've seen of him, and he's continued to develop kind of quite nicely. But I think Avia and Balak-Wisha we're going to see at some point. Kirk, I'd be surprised if Kirk started, just because he's not offered too much so far. I've been a little bit disappointed by him, as have kind of most people. But he's certainly an interesting option to have. But being a cup final, you kind of have to go for it, I think, and you have to lean towards starting more offensive players in a game like this. And then, mixing up a little bit later on, depending on how the game goes. So, there's a big role for Mickey Balak-Wisha here, I think.
So maybe statement 5 is more like a conclusion of what we just said.
Yeah.
Antwerp has more tactical options than Mechelen.
Yeah, 100%. I just think with Mechelen, like, who you bringing off the bench? That's been Defoe's problem all season. There's been games where he just looks around, and he's like, well, who have I got? I can't remember who it was he brought off the bench. I don't know what game it was this season. He scored 2 goals in really quick succession. Was it Rob Rex or someone like that? And we haven't seen him since. He just disappeared into the ether, back into second team. They obviously brought Aguirre from Anderlecht via Burnley in, and he's kind of been the only one he trusts off the bench. I think his only real options are kind of like these weird sort of like, it depends who he starts in terms of his defenders, but then he's just got these weird kind of like Wolters, Van der Berg, Lavallee, who can play in central midfield or they can play in centre back, which isn't, unless they're ahead in the game, they're just not really useful in that situation. Which, saying that now, Van der Berg's going to score his like 40-yard screamer for the season that he always scores. But I don't think he's done that yet this season, so he is due one. But yeah, I think it's quite obvious, even without, like, obviously you lost Michael Fry, so you don't have that kind of striker to come off the bench. But even then, you can kind of bring on these other players that will change the game. Like if whichever winger you don't start, they can come on and change the game. Put Richie Delat up front, maybe that can change the game because he always loves a good goal. I mean, when we went to see them against East End, he scored an absolute screamer. So
yeah, true that. Yeah,
it was one of the best goals I've ever seen live. I had to text my friends and be like, "You'll never believe who just scored a goal that is one of the best goals I've ever seen." And they're like, "We can't believe he's still playing." Like everyone's like baffled. Richie Delat still plays.
He's not that old.
No, exactly. In English football minds, he's 38. But
he's been in England for quite the time. So yeah, I can place it in perspectives. While you both gone off firing bold statement after bold statement, which blew our 5 bold statements right away. I want to come back on one, Scott, on on Defour, you said Steven Defour is not T1 material. Is that do you mean he's not T1 material at all or yet?
Oh, do you see that now? There's a curveball. I would probably say yeah, because I know that he desperately wants to be a T1, and he's never hidden that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was always going to be very difficult for whoever followed Wouter Rankin, because Rankin did extremely well there, as everybody knows. And I think everybody was expecting there to be a dip for the club, particularly when it was clear that they weren't going to be able to invest financially on the pitch in the way that probably they arguably should have if they were going to try and maintain the level that Rankin had set. And you know, obviously Defour wasn't the first choice, and has kind of taken on the mantle almost by default. He's a local boy, obviously. He's from Mechelen and he's very highly thought of. And when I was in Mechelen recently, actually, I got casually talking to some Mechelen fans in some bars that I was in. And I asked him specifically about Steven Defour and kind of their thoughts on him, because I'm sort of unconvinced. And while they understood what my concerns were, I think they felt that he deserves a little bit longer just because of the season they've had, and some of the issues that they've had haven't actually been down to him. They have had some, really unfortunate injuries that have had an impact, I think, to be fair. So, I think they feel the start of next season is going to be really important for them. But more important than that, actually, I think they've got to look at their recruitment. Last year, it was pretty poor. I think there's a huge emotional tie for Steven Defour, obviously, to manage Mechelen, with it being his hometown club as well, and having played for them, and knowing the club inside out very well. And the youth academy as well. So he was never going to turn down that opportunity, and he's certainly been dropped in at the deep end. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do next season, and whether they can have a better summer of recruitment than they did last year. Because I think if they don't, they're going to have another really, really hard season ahead of them. So we'll see what happens there, and I hope things do work out for Steven. He's a slightly controversial figure for a number of reasons. He's made some interesting choices in his playing career, hasn't he? Which some people won't let him forget. But he's a great lover of the game, and cares about that club very much. So. I know we're going to see a very animated Steven Defour on the touchline on Sunday. He likes to kick his jacket, take his jacket off, and throw it on the ground theatrically and kick it when things aren't going well. You should probably kick the water bottles, because that's even more effective. But the danger is that's a health and safety hazard.
Yeah. And then you hit a via, and then
then
hell breaks loose.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that may well happen yet.
A good advice for Steve. A good advice for Steven Defour is that don't kick too hard because he might get injured.
Keep it down, Stevie.
I'm sorry, Bob. I interrupted.
No, maybe we got a great in-depth analysis of both teams and the game. Maybe do you care for a little prediction?
Yeah, got to be done. You can go first, Scott.
Well, I think despite my soft spot for Mechelen, I do think Antwerp are going to win.
Get in there.
But I think Mechelen will make more of a game of this than I think most people are expecting, because they really have to. It's a cup final. You don't want to go out and not think, do you know what, we gave it a good go. I can see Antwerp winning 3-1, I think. Mechelen are going to score.
That was exactly the result I was going for. So in the interest, I'll go 4-1. I think we 1-1 at half time. Go for it. I feel like Nicholas Storm's going to score. I feel like he hasn't scored for a while. So he'll score, but then, Balikwisha, we've spoken about him. He'll score, I think, at least one. And then whoever else can score the other three. Richie's going to score one as well. That'll be my other prediction. So 4-1 Antwerp, but as a neutral, I hope it's closer.
Yeah.
I forgot to thank you dearly because Bob is anti
No,
Balikwisha.
I'm
And
not
I'm the I'm the president of the anti Balikwisha club. So cheers, guys.
I'm just deeply disappointed in the shape he's showing lately. That's all.
He's a bit off form, but he just turned out to be a father, so he has every excuse. He has every excuse, and now he has every excuse as well to score and dedicate these goals to his newborn baby, and win us the cup. Hopefully,
That's right.
Maybe one more
All of the
thing.
families will be in the stands.
Let's not talk about the cup final. Just give me one name. Who do you think will win the league? Because in our podcast, we have avid believers who really think we can win the league. Ziggy, for one. And I'm more skeptical. I don't believe that our wingers are good enough to make the difference. But if you had to pick one team,
That's such a difficult one, isn't it, Ben? You know, if you'd asked us this last week or the week before, we might have given you a different answer. I actually think it's any one of three teams. I think, you know, I think club are out of it. I genuinely do, despite what some people think. I think it's too big an ask for them. I do think Antwerp can win it, and I've been saying for ages now in the pod, and both Ben and Joris agree with me that they're absolutely in this. The thing about Antwerp, I think, is they have this ability to stifle sides quite successfully who play quite open, expansive football. So they've done very well against Genk and Union generally. And they're the one side who've actually been quite effective at stopping those two sides playing their own natural game. So I think they are absolutely in it. And I can't really pick one between them at the moment because it is that close.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's going to be Union. I think they do it this year. I think they've just got everything they need in terms of on the pitch and on the bench, because they can have an injury at the back and it's fine because they've got like Makido or they've got Sykes to come in, so that's fine. They're kind of fine there. In midfield, I think Puertas is a really, really good player, and I think he's a really underrated player that can just come in. And then you look on the wings, they've got Lapusan and Adingra. Like, you can play either of those, they're fine. Strikers, obviously Victor Boniface, but he hasn't really done it in the league. Gustav Nielsen shouldn't score goals, but he does. Like, he's like, we spoke about him on this podcast. He's just a strange footballer who just, he had that ridiculous
he
way.
shouldn't, but he does.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? You watch him and you're like, how is this man scoring so many goals? But he just does. So I just think they've got what they need. They've got probably one of the best coaches as well. I think Gats is a really, really good coach. I just think Genk without Onuachu just don't look like the same team. I feel like they're what Union were last year. They've just kind of run out of energy and run out of steam.
For me, they're lacking a bit of confidence and self-belief at the moment, Genk. And Union, for me, I think their biggest advantage is that the broad squad in general is used to play with each other since their Challenger Pro League days.
Yeah,
and I think that will be the biggest challenge for us, I think, and not to lose some stupid points with an away game in Genk, for example.
we're all saying this, and now Club Brugge are going to win it, and it's going to be the most boring playoffs ever because all the other teams will just give up, and everyone will be really upset.
but let's say Antwerp wins the league. We invite you both to Antwerp. Come to Belgium. Come to Antwerp. We'll have dinner. We'll go out for drinks, and then you can celebrate with us.
Yeah, I'm definitely.
Let's do that
Absolutely,
anyway.
yeah.
Let's do that
we do
anyway.
it. Yeah. Cup final,
Yeah.
league, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we got it.
Yeah.
Thanks again for taking the time and giving us that great analysis.
What a delight.
I'm,
An absolute delight.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was great.
Yeah. And maybe to end the podcast and make a bit of promotion, follow these guys on Twitter. Follow these on all known podcast channels. Belgian Football Podcast.
You definitely learn a thing or two about Belgian football, way more than you can learn from me listening to our podcast. So give them some love; they deserve it.
Scott, Ben, Bob, thank you very
Ziggy.
much, and hopefully we'll speak and see each other soon.